How you actually sow the seeds depends on what the seed is, how big it is, and obviously all the other options, what you have to hand. Multi-sowing is something I've covered in a lot of my videos, so do have a look at them. But here's an example of beetroot. Beetroot seeds are quite big, so they're easy to count out. And we put 4, made a little hole in the compost there, put 4 seeds in. Lo and behold, we have 4 plants. Now, it doesn't always happen. Some beetroot seeds germinate more than one and you get more, so you have to thin them out. But anyway, we're aiming for 4 beetroot in each cell. If you think that this is a 60 cells in a tray like that, that's 240 beetroots. You know, so you can raise a lot of seedlings very efficiently using multi-sowing techniques, for example. Multi-sowing that doesn't work for everything, like these celery seeds that are so tiny, or tomatoes even, which also, because here what we did was sowed lots of different varieties all in one tray, and even some peppers there. This was about 2 weeks ago, and they've been on the warmth of the hotbed since then. And you can see they're well germinated now. They got a bit leggy. Actually, they started life in the conservatory, and that's why some of them, the ones that came out first, have got a bit tall. And this is something you can do with pricking out, is you can bury the stems. So pricking out gives you a way of redressing some potential issues and making the plants a bit more sturdy. So all these different varieties of tomatoes we're going to now prick out into module trays, and after that we shall pot them on, but that won't be for another 2 or 3 weeks. But the pricking out stage it's very, very simple. You're just pulling seedlings out of a seed tray like that. There's a celery, for example, and I've already filled this little tray with compost, and I'm just simply pushing it in. It's nothing precise, you know, the little bit of root gets lost on the way maybe, or hopefully not too much, and you're just making enough of a hole to pop it in. The root doesn't have to be going vertically downwards or anything like that. So there we have celeries that are going from there to there. It's quite quick and easy, and then they will grow on, and these will be ready to go out in the garden probably in about another 4 weeks from now, for example. So what is a good compost to use? Well, there's such an amazing choice out there. It's actually quite difficult to choose or know which one is a good one, and they do vary year on year, so there is a little bit of potluck about this. We're talking here about potting compost, or what they, in the USA apparently is called potting soil. So it's some kind of compost that's going to have good amount of nutrients in, and also good drainage. And that's where sometimes you might be looking at adding something like that, which is the vermiculite, to improve drainage, but mostly you should be able to buy what's called a multi-purpose or all-purpose compost, which is good for everything, from sowing to pricking out to raising a small plant, even to potting on. And when you find a good one, it's maybe not a bad idea to stick with it. I've been using the West Riding for a long time now. It grows great compost, but here we're doing actually a little trial. I'm always trialing new ones. It's fascinating to see the differences. These are 4 different composts which you can buy at the moment in the UK, and you can see there's quite a difference in the size of plants there. And of these 4 little trays with 6 plants in each, the biggest plants at the moment are the only one of the 4 that's not organic. That does quite often happen, I've noticed. That, you know, you've got incredible flush of nutrients from the chemical synthetic nutrients, but what can then happen is they suddenly run out, and your plant maybe then isn't so good in the long run. So, you know, it's a bit swings and roundabouts, pick and choose, but it'll be interesting. We're going to keep these plants going for a bit longer and see what happens. I mean, here though we have a tray, for example, of lettuce. That's organic compost, so you can see in the end there are plenty of nutrients in there. With the organic compost, they sometimes just take a bit longer to get going. So you've raised these lovely plants, and then the moment of decision comes. When are they ready to go out in the ground? And I'm often planting quite small, so I'll give you some examples of the stage at which I plant to give you some ideas. For example, look at these fellas. They're not very big. These are actually turnips, multi-sown turnips, and we've planted the bigger ones already and left these in the tray for another few days, and I'm very happy to plant these turnips out when they are no bigger than that. This works. So don't be afraid of putting out plants when they're small. If your ground is ready, if the conditions are correct outside, and maybe you're running out of propagating space inside as well. So planting small plants can be a big saving in many ways, and small plants also take better in the ground. If your plants get really big or slightly outgrow the module, you get this kind of thing happening. These are cabbage. And cabbage are big, hungry plants, or potentially are. And you see how the lower leaves there, the cotyledons just behind my finger, are going pale colour. That shows how the module compost is starting to run out of nutrients. Now this obviously is a very small block, and that's already quite a big cabbage plant. So we have planted out as many as I'm going to need actually of these. We're probably not going to use these in the end, but I always hang on to them in case. That's another good thing to do, is just keep a few in reserve. But as a result, these have grown on for a week since we planted the main batch, and they are now getting a bit too big for the compost that's in there. If you wanted to grow them on some more, you could put them into a slightly bigger module, but it's often actually a lot quicker, simpler and cheaper just to put them in the ground before they get too big. And you can see the effect of having a bit more compost on a very similar plant. So this is Calabrese, and these were sown at the same time as the cabbage, but we pricked them out into just a slightly larger block of compost, so that has made a slightly larger plant. So that's an example of the options you got, but the small plants work as well. There's a plant of rocket, for example, which was again grown in the same amount of compost, not quite as big as the Calabrese. And then here we have peas from 2 different sowing dates, and you can see the same effect as we saw on the cabbage, where the older pea plant is just going a bit yellow at the bottom. It's running low on nutrients. Really needed to have gone in at least a week ago, for me anyway. More at this stage. So this was sown a week after the one I just showed you, so that's a younger sowing. That was sown on the 20th of March, so that's just under 3 weeks old. That's plenty enough time for a pea to be ready to plant. So I'm very happy to plant peas out at that stage, or smaller. I've done a video on how to grow peas, and you'll see in there that I'm planting quite small peas. And also what we were doing in that one is we took the pea plants off the hotbed and put them straight in the ground. So that's another way you can simplify this process, particularly if you're growing in a full light environment like this, where plants are quite stocky anyway. You don't need to harden off. You can put them in the ground and cover them with fleece straight away, as we're going to see in a minute. From the greenhouse, I've brought out a selection of the module trays we've just been looking at to show this is great size, all of them for planting. They could even be a bit smaller, but hey, and I've made a little garden here, and it's ideal planting weather. It's the right time of year for all of these plants, which is early spring. These are all early vegetables. So beetroot, you can see how I used my dibber to make a little hole for each of the modules. That's very quick and simple. It's in the compost, which is on top of a no-dig bed, and I'm then just popping in the module, and you can see going in quite deep, especially where you've got a plant like cabbage with a long stem. You can push it right in, bury the stem there. Lettuce doesn't want to be quite so deep because it's not got a long stem, so just going like that. Broad bean even. You can grow almost every plant, every vegetable from a module like this to plant out. The only ones I don't do are carrot and parsnip. That's turnip. I'm going to lean right over here. Onion, and finally spinach. So this is a crazy little planting here. Lots of different things: spinach, onion, turnip, broad beans. The idea of the turnips and lettuce will finish a bit sooner, and then the broad beans will fill out the space. And coriander, dill I've got here as well, between these cabbage and beetroot. And there we are. I've just uncovered some plants that we put into this bed a mere 8 days ago, but you can see they were therefore pretty small at the time we put them in, because actually they've barely grown, but they've done the hard yards of getting established, and without too much pest damage, a little bit of slug eating, but nothing too severe. So this is still only early April. nothing's barely grown yet, and yet already we have a bed planted up with mature seedlings that, with the weather now warming up finally, and with this fleece cover on top, which is helping to keep even today when it's not sunny, but there's enough brightness, and this compost feels warm, the surface compost. The fleece is trapping the solar radiation and turning it into warmth there for these plants. So it's a very efficient way of getting your young seedlings going, and I'd be confident now that within 6 to 8 weeks we'll be harvesting spinach and lettuce and some spring onions and things. So plant raising is a great way to start the season.